On this week's episode, we're going to be making mie goreng, which is Malaysian-style stir-fried noodles. We're going to make fresh noodles by hand, but don't fret, it's really easy. For this dish, you're going to need spinach, habanero peppers, or again, whichever type of chilies you choose, fresh shallots, fresh garlic, cilantro, shrimp, fish sauce, green onions, sesame oil, dried chilies. For this one I chose arbol chilies. We're going to make our handmade pasta, and you're going to need some fresh squid.
So we're going to make standard Asian noodle. This could be used for ramen dishes, this could be used for stir fries. And there's one ingredient that makes all the difference. It's this kansui, it's called. It's potassium carbonate and sodium bicarbonate solution. It's really the magic that gives it all of its flavor. Otherwise, the rest of the ingredients are really just nothing more than what you would find in a typical pasta that doesn't have eggs in it. Flour, water, and salt. So it's a very basic dough. We're going to make this right on the table. If you have a mixer, you can certainly make it in a mixing machine, but I really enjoy making pasta by hand. I'm going to add a little bit of salt. Mix that in. Make a well in the center, and in that well we're going to add the water. Once you have the water in, we're going to take one finger and start to kick some of the flour in. Be prepared if you spring a leak. If the water tries to get away from you, just toss some of the flour on top of it. And at this point I can start to get, see, there it goes. Just get a little bit of flour on it, don't panic. And it'll start to soak it up. All right, so now I get two fingers into the dough and start to combine the flour and the water. You want to get all of the dough wet. Get a dough scraper and gather everything up. And the magic ingredient in here is only a half of a teaspoon of the kansui. And you can see right away the dough starts to turn a yellowish color. It adds a little bit of flavor and tightens up the texture of the dough so it's got a little bit more chew to it. All right, now we're going to start kneading everything together. Ideally, you want all of the ingredients incorporated. If it seems like it's a little bit too dry, you can add a little bit more water. If it seems a little wet, you can add a little bit more flour. The dough will be very stiff, and it takes a little bit of effort to get it to come together. Some of the flour might seem a little dry, like it's not going to incorporate, but if you're patient and you keep kneading, eventually you will get it incorporated. All right, so when I'm kneading the dough, what I do is flatten it out, fold it, turn it, and then flatten again. And you just want to continue repeating that process over and over until the dough is smooth and all of the ingredients are mixed together. The whole process of kneading will take about 5 to 10 minutes. Some people like to do this in the machine, and it'll take about the same amount of time. You just add all the ingredients together and use a dough hook, and it'll take about 10 minutes. So you just want to observe the dough and make sure that it gets nice and smooth. Once the dough is smooth, it might have a few little cracks in it, but that's okay. You just want to touch it, and you'll see that it kind of springs back where you touched it, right? It's very bouncy. And then you can set this aside for 20 minutes to let it relax. Once it's relaxed, then we can roll it out with a pasta machine. So while this is resting, I'm just going to cover it with the bowl that I used to mix it in. All right, once the dough has rested for at least 20 minutes, you come back and you touch the dough and you'll see that it's not so bouncy and springy anymore. And I've got a little bit of cornstarch in a bowl with a sifter. I'm just going to put a little bit down on the table, a little bit over the top, and just help prevent sticking. And then I'm going to start to roll it out. The next step is we're going to put it into the pasta machine. So I want it to be pretty close to the size that the pasta machine can handle to start with. If you try to put the dough through the machine when it's too thick, it has a tendency to break and tear. So I'm going to roll it out about 1/2 of an inch thick. All right, I'm going to go ahead and set up the pasta machine. And clamp it to the table so that it doesn't skip around while we're rolling on it. All right, and open the rollers all the way up. And this is the part where I usually like to get my kids involved. This is their favorite part. It's almost like, playing with Play-Doh, right? You got the pasta dough, and now it's time to roll it out. You want to take your time and make it thinner and thinner with each step. If you try to go too fast, again, it has a tendency to tear. It starts getting very long. If it gets too long for you to handle, you can cut the dough into pieces so it's a little bit shorter. And you just keep making it thinner and thinner until you've got the desired thickness that you would like. Pasta machines vary based on the numbers and the sizes that you get, but I usually take it all the way to about 1.5 to 2 on this machine. At this point, the dough is pretty thin. I like the way that looks. I think that will make a nice chewy noodle. So we're going to go ahead and start cutting it. So for the cutting side, I like to sift a little bit of cornstarch over it. Can help prevent sticking. And there we have it. Fresh noodles. When you set these down, immediately put a little bit of cornstarch over them and toss them to make sure that the cornstarch is coated. The noodles have the greatest tendency to stick together out of any step of the process. And that's one of the reasons why it's so important that you try to keep the dough dry when you're mixing. Once you have all of that tossed, we can cut it. I usually go for about 12-inch long pieces. but you can cut it to your desired length. There we have it, fresh handmade noodles. The noodles, you need a big pot of water to boil. We're going to need something to drain off the noodles and separate it from the water. And once we've got that cooked, we'll be ready to start the stir fry. So I've got the water boiling. I'm going to put about half of them for this size of pot. And fresh noodles, they cook a lot faster than dried noodles. Typically, you can expect that they'll take about a minute. All right, that should be enough. All right, make sure they're well drained. If you don't get all the water off of the noodles, they'll continue to absorb the water, and then they can get very, very soft. And another thing that I like to do to prevent sticking is put a little bit of sesame oil on the noodles and toss them to coat. There we have it, our fresh cooked noodles ready for stir fry. All right, so now we're going to slice some shallots and get them ready for frying for this dish. I've already peeled them ahead of time, and I'm just going to slice them very thinly. Basically what we're going to make is crispy shallot rings, kind of like very, very thin onion rings that are cooked until they're very dry. And you want to make these as thin as you can. And be careful, the shallots tends to jump when you're slicing it. Watch your fingers. Don't worry about the last little bit if it's too dangerous. All right. And I've got a pan of hot oil. Just want to use a neutral oil, peanut oil, canola oil, and get it nice and hot. I usually shoot for about 350. And I add the shallots. I've got a container with paper towels to absorb all the excess oil, and a little strainer to grab them and pull them out. When you add the shallots, they're really wet, and it'll cause the oil to start foaming up. So don't add too many all at once, or it can boil over. Oil fires can be rather dangerous in the kitchen, so you want to avoid those. All right, and I'm just going to let that continue to cook over a low heat. Temperature will probably drop down to about 325 while it's cooking. And you want to let it continue until they get a nice light golden brown in color. Once they've got that light golden color, we can pull them out, and they'll get just a couple of shades darker as they cool off. Now I'm going to toast some dried chilies. These are chili arbol, which you can find in most Latin and Asian markets. And I'm just going to toast them whole, dry. And once they're crispy, they'll have a little bit of color on them, and we can pull them out, and we'll de-stem, de-seed, and then we'll grind that up. And you can even let the chilies get a little bit of char, so it's perfectly fine if they got a little bit of color on them. And watch out, this lets off some pretty intense aromas, so make sure you're in a well-ventilated kitchen when you're doing this. When I do this at home, I often get a little burner and I go outside on the porch or something to toast them because the aroma is a little bit too much. But it is worth all the trouble. All right. Those chilies are crispy enough. Got a nice little char on them. Let them cool off a little bit. I'm going to wear gloves, as always, whenever I handle chilies. just to make sure I don't end up hurting myself later. Once the chilies are toasted, I'm going to take each chili, split it open, and just kind of twist it and pinch it in your fingers. And what will happen is most of those, if not all, of the seeds will fall out. It's okay if you have a couple in there, but it's nicer without the seeds. They lend kind of a unpleasant texture and bitter taste. With fresh chilies, most of the intensity or spice is in the flesh that's wrapped around the seeds. Keep an eye on those shallots. They, as long as they're wet, they're not going to have much color, but as soon as they lose enough water and start to get dry, their temperature goes up rapidly, and it'll go from light golden to dark and bitter really fast. It's almost like toasting nuts or toasting spices. So just keep your eye on it and occasionally give it a little stir. The slower you're cooking it, right, the lower the heat, the more room you'll have to stop it. If you're cooking it too fast over too high of a heat, it's very difficult to stop before it burns because it only takes a blink of an eye before it's gone too far. All right, I'm just finishing up the last couple of chilies, and right at about the same time, my shallots are done toasting. They got a nice light golden brown color to them. And I'm just going to drain off all the excess oil. And this is used all across Southeast Asia and all kinds of dishes, stir-fried rice, stir-fried noodles, even just like curried rice dishes. I've placed it on top of curries as well, and it just adds a really nice sweet flavor to the dish. So, fried shallots. Also, we have the chilies. I've gone ahead and destemmed and deseeded all of the chilies. And now we're going to grind it up. I like to use a mortar and pestle for this. If you have a coffee grinder, you can do it in there, but your coffee is probably going to taste like chilies later. You might want to dedicate that just for spices. We're going to grind the chilies up until they're a nice coarse texture. It doesn't need to be completely pulverized into a powder. But you want something that can be easily sprinkled on a dish. All right. That looks great. Nice little coarse texture of ground chili flakes. All right, so for the stir-fried noodles, we're going to prepare some squid. And I have the fresh bodies, tentacles, and then I also have some shrimp. And what we're going to do for stir fry, you want everything to be bite-sized pieces. You don't want anything to be too large. So you always want to cut stuff up for stir fries. Oftentimes stir fries are eaten with chopsticks also. So you're not going to have a knife and a fork at the table to cut things up. So you want stuff that's going to be in a size where you can immediately put it in your mouth and chew on it and not have to struggle with it. So I'm just going to cut the shrimp into bite-sized chunks. All right, so I got all the shrimp cut up. The tentacles, just go through them and make sure that they're broken up and there are no beaks still inside. Looks good. And then with the tubes, the bodies, I'm going to cut those open. If there's still anything inside, you want to clean that out. If you find any of these little wings, you can tear those off and toss them aside also. They're a little tough. And then I'm going to score just lightly and across to create sort of like a diamond pattern. It's very subtle and you can just barely see the marks. You don't want to cut all the way through, you just want to lightly score it. And what that does is helps to make the final product a little bit more tender. Then I'll cut that up into chunks. All right. And now that I've finished that, I'm going to change gloves and wash my hands and swap out the cutting boards. I don't want to cross-contaminate vegetables with any of the squid and shrimp. Now we're going to mince up some fresh garlic. So I have a few cloves of garlic that I went ahead and peeled earlier. Smash them to break up the flesh. And then we'll start mincing the garlic. All right, you can even take your knife and drag it across the board to break the garlic up even further. And it helps keep it flat so that you can chop it a lot easier. And that should be just fine for this dish. Looks great. Also got some green onions. And for these, I'm going to cut them into thin slices on the bias. It's very important for stir fries that you get all the ingredients prepared before you begin cooking, because stir fries cook really, really quickly. You cut up everything into small pieces. You get a very, very hot pan with oil, and it cooks really quickly while you're stirring. If you forget to get something prepared ahead of time and you start cooking the dish, it's difficult to stop without burning anything, because you really have to keep everything moving the entire time, hence why it's called stir fry. So I'm just going to pinch the leaves off the cilantro. It's okay if you got some stem, but I want to remove most of the large pieces of stem. All right. And just slice it. Doesn't have to be too fine. Next, we have some fresh chilies for this dish. So I'm going to put on some gloves again to keep my hands safe from all of the chili oils. All right, so I have some serranos and some habaneros. And what I'm going to do is just cut off the stems, split the chilies in half. We can discard the stems, and I'll even cut out the seeds. Their texture of the seeds is not very pleasant, and they're kind of bitter and sometimes astringent. So I'm going to do the same thing with the habaneros. And you can use any variety of chili you'd like, and any quantity, just so long as you like the level of heat that you've got. It's okay to substitute other types of chilies. All right, I'll just scrape out those seeds. All right, so now we'll slice the peppers. There we go, nice fine mince. All right. And we're ready to begin the stir fry. Today I'm going to be using a wok. I like this style of wok because it has a handle. You can almost use it like a saute pan, right? And let the food jump around in it. There are other style of wok that does not have a handle like this. It has two smaller handles on the side. That one you're not going to let things jump around in the pan. Instead, you'll have to use the wok shovel and the wok spoon, and this is what you would stir fry everything with. Either way, it's up to you. So I'm going to turn it on and let it get hot. All right, when the pan starts smoking, we're going to add some sesame oil, garlic, chilies. In Asian cuisine, they often like when the oils catch on fire a little bit. It's the flame kiss, and it gives a little bit of flavor to the dish. It's not something that we typically do in Western cuisine, but it is something that I have grown accustomed to. It's almost like the taste you would get when grilling. I'm going to add the shrimp and squid next. When you're cooking proteins, sometimes they stick together. So that's when it's a good time to grab the wok shovel. Make sure you get the proteins broken apart so they don't stick together. All right, that's almost done. I'm going to add the noodles. Should be enough. And depending on what kind of vegetable you use, you might want to add it before the noodles or after. Today I decided to use some fresh leafy spinach. I'm going to slow the heat down, add some chilies, green onions, cilantro, and all of our salt is going to come from fish sauce. And that's it. It is done. Let me check the seasoning. And we're ready to eat. All right. Serve with a little bit of cilantro, just a pinch of green onions, and some of the fried shallots on top.